Hello all, let's begin our module 4 of the chapter The Three Orders. In our earlier modules, we have already learned about the concept of feudalism, the first order which consists of the clergy, that is basically the people related to the church. Second, we had read about the second order who were basically the nobility and the whole system of the vassalage. Now, in this module, we are basically going to learn about the third order, that is the peasants. The third order consisted of vast majority of people which were mainly the cultivators. That is, they used to practice agriculturists, and therefore the majority of the third order consisted of the peasants. The cultivators had two categories, that is free peasants and the serfs. The free peasants were those who had owned lands but worked as tenants of the land. They had to give military services for at least 40 days in a year. They had to work on lord's fields for 3 days, generally in a week, in the form of the labor rent. Together with this, they had to provide unpaid services for works like digging ditches, gathering firewood, building fences, and maintaining roads and buildings. Women and children had to do several tasks together with work on fields like spinning thread, weaving cloth, making candles, and preparing wine from the grapes. The free peasants had to pay a tax known as tele to the king, from which clergy and nobles were exempted. That means that it was only the third estate that had to pay the taxes to the kings, and therefore they were very oppressed. This was the order that has the least amount of money with them. Another category of the peasants included the peasants who were unfree, or were also known as the serfs. The serfs tilled the land of the lord. Most part of the produce was submitted to the lord. They had to work on the lands of lord without wages. They were not allowed to leave the estate without prior permission from the lord. The lord claimed several monopolies at the cost of his serfs. Serf could use only lord's flour mills, his oven to bake their breads, and his wine presses to distill wine. The lord decided whom a serf should marry, or might give the blessing to the serf's choice, but on a payment of a fee. Thus, it was the third estate that worked from sunrise to sundown, growing food and making other products for their families or lords, or to sell to towns. Peasants were usually serfs and were not allowed to leave the manor without the lord's permission. Serfs were given land and a house in order to work for the lord. Free peasants rented land from the lord and didn't have to work for him. Thus, summing up the differences between the serfs and free peasant, serfs were the peasants who were bound to the land. Serfs were forced to do all of the labor on large farms and were usually given small tracts of land that were barely enough to survive. Serf could become free if he stays off the manor for at least a year. On the other hand, free peasants were the lower class workers who were not bound to the land, and they could come and go as they please. That's why they didn't need permission of the lords to actually go out of the field or out of the manor. But the serfs, they needed the permission of the lords for each of their movement. So thus the medieval society was divided into three groups, which were called estates, or the three orders. The first was the clergy, who were the monks and priests that worked for the Catholic Church. Their duty was to pray for the spiritual salvation of the people. Second were the nobles, who were basically the lords, knights, and included their families. Their duty was to protect the population and the land from the attack of the outsiders. And lastly, the third estate basically included the workers class, and workers were mainly the peasants that were in the third estate, and some of them were craftsmen and merchant as well. Their duty was to produce the food and goods needed by the society. In our next module, we will be learning about the factors affecting the social and economic relations. While members of the first two orders saw the social system as stable and unchanging, but there were several processes which were actually transforming the system. as these possessive has an effect on the social and economic ties between lords and the vassals. We will examine such processes in our next module.